Bloody MacKenzie, Greyfriars Chilling Poltergeist haunting is a story that has plagued the Greyfriars Kirkland for centuries. The cemetery, located in Edinburgh, Scotland, has a rich history steeped in bloodshed and tragedy despite its peaceful atmosphere. While many people visit graveyards to pay respects to their loved ones or maybe find solace within their silence, Greyfriars Chilling history gives it the opposite effect for some people, especially when the sun goes down. I'm Bleaki, and today I will tell you the real-life ghost stories surrounding the Greyfriars Cemetery. This tale includes a loyal dog who refused to leave his master's side, the world's most detested grave robbers, a homeless man who made a disturbing discovery, and a violent poltergeist lurking within the shadows, Bloody MacKenzie. While sounding like a new variation of a cocktail you would have with tomato juice and a stick of celery, he was in fact a 17th century political figure who was responsible for thousands of deaths in life and attempts to reap more in the afterlife.
There's a dozen corpses on the left side, swear one's smiling at me.
Greyfriars Kirkyard has earned itself the reputation of being the most haunted cemetery in Scotland, and after a 400-year history, you can see why. Greyfriars was the only cemetery in Edinburgh for a long time, which meant that bodies were quite literally buried on top of each other at every location within its 5 acres. This includes 238 monuments, 112 tombs, and over 300 wall plaques, along with several Gothic sculptures. Built on the site of a pre-Reformation Franciscan monastery, the Greyfriars Kirkland was opened in 1562, becoming the first church constructed in post-Reformation Scotland. It was established as a burial area during the reign of Mary Queen of Scots and was built after the old cemetery of St Giles became overcrowded and more space for the dead was in dire need. In fact, several tons of human bones were exhumed from their resting places in 1879 and reburied in Greyfriars. When the Black Plague hit Britain in 1568, the land was needed more than ever. In fact, it has seen an estimated 100,000 burials since then. Back then, graveyards were founded outside the city walls because they tended to kick up a bit of a stink, but no amount of stank can get in the way of development, and as the city grew larger throughout the centuries and more buildings were built around them, the graveyards would eventually be enveloped by the structures and sit within the ever-expanding city walls. With it being more cramped than a gym on January 1st, it's no surprise that many of the spirits here are restless. Greyfriars was named after the Franciscan friary that previously stood on the site, which was demolished in 1560, where the monks wore grey robes. The monks got a rough ride of it, as they originally founded the friary to tend to the sick people in Edinburgh, but were forced out during the Reformation in 1558. In a sick twist of irony, just 10 years later, the citizens of the city would have needed the help of the monks the most during the plague. During Queen Mary's short-lived yet chaotic reign, many lords of the land were tossed into unmarked graves, including James Douglas, who was accused of killing Queen Mary's husband. Drama! Just like how England was torn over religion during the Tudor period, Scotland also saw war and conflict. You see, the religion of the country was often forced upon the people by whatever monarch was ruling at the time. It was literally their way or the highway, and if they were caught practicing the wrong faith, they would end up being brutally executed as a traitor. When Henry VIII established the Anglican Church in England so he could divorce his wife, the country was thrown into religious chaos. Imagine creating a religion just so you can give your missus the axe. Oh wait, that was the other two. Many people chose to refuse to convert to the Anglican faith from being devout Catholics and died as martyrs. When King Charles II took over as king, he was also a bit of a dictator, and just like Henry, would execute those who rejected the Church of England. Those who were devoted to the Presbyterian Church of Scotland or the National Covenant were branded Covenanters and were hunted down as traitors. And this is where the most infamous ghost haunting Greyfriars Kirkland comes into our story. In 1677, Sir George MacKenzie was named the Lord Advocate by the court of Charles II. His job was to track down and punish the Covenanters, making examples of those who dared to oppose the Church of England. After the Battle of Bothwell Bridge in 1679, MacKenzie and his soldiers managed to capture 1,200 Covenanters and held them as prisoners. But the problem was, there wasn't enough space in the Scottish prisons to hold all of them. This meant that MacKenzie had to think outside the box and decided to keep them locked up in various places, including an estimated 400 to 700 of them being kept in the Greyfriars Kirkland with no shelter during the Scottish winter. Many were mistreated by guards, beaten to death, died from the elements, or simply starved to death. Their bodies were buried in an unmarked mass grave somewhere in the cemetery, with many of their heads ending up on spikes along the city gates. By the end of 1679, only 48 Covenanters remained. These men were taken to Leith and sentenced to transportation to America, but were said to have all died when their ships sank off the coast of the Orkney Isles. In total, it is believed that MacKenzie was responsible for over 18,000 deaths during his 8-year rule over the Covenanters, which earned him the nickname Bloody MacKenzie. Shame I wasn't around during that time. I could have come up with a much more fitting title, like Stinky McCurlywig or something. What makes this worse is that MacKenzie actually began his career defending the Covenanters and fighting to save their lives. He even got the Marquis of Argyll acquitted from a charge of treason. It soon turned out that MacKenzie was only in it for himself and was only defending them to establish his name in political society and make money. Once established, he switched sides, defending the king and the Scottish Church. This support paid off, since he became King's advocate for King Charles II in Scotland in 1677. Double-crossing people to build clout and line his own pockets in the process. MacKenzie would have made a really good YouTuber if he was around today. Hey guys, make sure you buy my new crypto coin, it's going straight to the moon! It was Mackenzie's selfishness and devotion of convenience to the king that got him promoted to the head of law in Scotland, but it was also his downfall. When William of Orange came to the throne, he gave religious control back to the Presbyterians, now making the oppressors the oppressed. Bloody Mackenzie was terrified for his life and fled to Oxford, England. He died of natural causes in Westminster on May 8, 1691. Mackenzie wrote a lot of legal essays in his time and was actually a defender of the use of torture and was proud that it was legal in Scotland back then. When it came to witchcraft and those accused of it, he was far more softer. He believed accusing, torturing and killing women for witchcraft was a despicable act and that witches are not as common as believed. So old George can draw a line somewhere. Did you notice he said that they existed but just not common? I guess they couldn't admit witches weren't real, or else they would have had to get rid of one of the many reasons the rich and powerful could control the poor and get rid of people they didn't like, eh? Say, did that wench over yonder have an opinion?
Aye, me lord, I think she did.
I sense witchcraft. Get my donking stool! As a Lord Advocate, Mackenzie's body was brought back to Scotland. He was to have a grand domed roof mausoleum etched with intricate detailing and towering columns. But in an ironic twist of fate, it was constructed right next to the Covenanters' prison where he caused so much misery and death. A constant reminder in the afterlife of all the evil he committed while on this earth. After learning of his murky history, the pupils at the George Heriot School attempted to torment the spirit of George Mackenzie for generations. They would often spend their lunch times running up to the tomb and pounding on the door as hard as they could with their fist, reciting the poem, "Bloody Mackenzie, come out if you dare, lift the snake and draw the bear." While the children would run off in fits of laughter, what they didn't realise is that Bloody Mackenzie did dare to come out. When a man's soul is certainly in hell, his body will scarce lie quiet in a tomb however costly. Some time or other the door must open, and the reprobate come forth in the abhorred garments of the grave. Over the last few hundred years, the spirit of Bloody Mackenzie has been seen wandering among the tombs of the cemetery in the dead of night. While those sightings were rare, the spirit of Mackenzie seemed to have gained power in 1998 after people not only reported sighting the spirit, but were physically attacked by him. At least 140 people have collapsed and passed out while walking through the cemetery, especially those who have managed to gain entry to the tomb, now known as the Black Mausoleum, or the area known as the Covenanters' Prison. In fact, it is the prison which once held those persecuted for their beliefs, which is said to be the most haunted location at Greyfriars. Visitors are reported being violently pushed, scratched, and bitten, with visible bruises and lacerations appearing on their bodies, even in places they couldn't reach, like their backs. In an interview on the Edinburgh Live News website, a man called Chris said he was taking a tour when he was affected by an invisible force. He said that he had attended the tour on his own as his friends were too scared. In hindsight, maybe he should have taken a leaf out of their book. At first, everything was fine, but when he got back to his hotel, he started to feel a burning sensation on his back. When checking in a mirror, he found scratches, which turned into red welts the next day. He was supposed to go back on another tour the next day, but felt too ill to attend. He finished the interview by saying, "I felt drained. No one could have done it while I was on the tour because I would have felt it. Because of the position of the scratches, there was no way I could have done it myself." Another woman who shared her experience at the Greyfriars Kirkland claimed that she was once looking inside the mausoleum. Suddenly, she felt her body go cold, like she had been submerged in icy water. Confused as to where the incredible draft was coming from, she was violently pushed back by an icy blast of air that seemingly came from the wall. She was tossed back out of the structure and fell to the ground. She was understandably terrified and refused to return to the cemetery again. One woman reported that she was once walking through the normally locked Covenanters prison. Taking the opportunity to explore the historic area of the site, she began walking past the damp tombs and overgrown weeds. Suddenly, she felt her hair get yanked by an invisible force. She turned to run back, but then felt a phantom hand grab hold of her neck. The rest of the attack became a blur, as the next thing she remembered was waking up on the cold, wet ground. Confused and terrified, she got to her feet and frantically looked around for the entity that had attacked her. But no one was around. She knew it wasn't a physical person who grabbed her and couldn't make sense of it. She told herself that she must have passed out and dreamed the whole thing, but as she started walking back, her neck began to ache. Checking her neck in the mirror, she saw dark bruises around her throat. Chillingly, this isn't the only time that people have reported having their hair or limbs pulled while in the cemetery, especially around the mausoleum or the Covenanters prison. In total, there are 350 documented attacks that are on record, which is just wild. People have also heard knocking noises under the ground of the tomb and on the walls. Strange unexplained smells have also been reported, which include sickly floral smells and sulphur. Dead animals are often found around the Black Mausoleum with no obvious cause of death. This is believed to be the work of bloody MacKenzie, who has managed to build his energy over the centuries and is powerful enough to stop the hearts of little creatures. There have also been sightings of figures who flit between headstones or peek out to people as they approach. With a blink of the eye, the figures vanish. Could this be the spirits of the unfortunate prisoners who are left to die in awful ways within the graveyard? Or could they be the ghosts of other poor souls buried within the hallowed grounds, confused about their mortal state? A tour guide who conducts the City of the Dead tours at the graveyard, Jan Andrew Henderson, who is also the company's founder, also claims that he has been a victim of the MacKenzie poltergeist. In fact, it was the worst activity caused by the ghost. He had been living next to the graveyard while working on his book about the spirit. At the time, he wasn't even sure the ghost existed, but after a fire broke out in his apartment, with fire officials never being able to explain why the blaze started, he was left with no doubt that bloody MacKenzie still held murderous intent. After many original documents on George MacKenzie were burnt to ash, Henderson promptly moved to Australia, leaving his ghost tour days behind him. Luckily, he did have digital copies. Eventually, the council decided that something had to be done, and the normally accessible prison was permanently locked and closed to the public, with only one tour able to access it. So why is a spirit from the 1600s still haunting the location he made into his own torture camp? Well, as mentioned before, it was in 1998 when the activity went from MacKenzie wandering the graveyard to violently attacking unsuspecting visitors. This isn't a coincidence, however, as an incident happened in that year as well as another in 2003, which seemingly awoke bloody MacKenzie from his eternal slumber and forced the twisted and disembodied soul to seek revenge on the modern world. Sometime between 1998 and 1999, a homeless man got caught in a heavy downpour during a storm one night while walking through the Greyfriars Kirkyard. He quickly ran over to George MacKenzie's mausoleum and forcibly broke the lock to escape the rain. Once inside, he found the coffins of George's relatives as well as the final resting place of the 17th century man. While waiting for the storm to pass, he began to get bored and started walking around to look at the different coffins. As he did, the floor suddenly gave way and he fell into a pit. The man thought he had fallen onto broken wood or the roots of surrounding trees, but he was wrong. Beneath him was a pile of bones, with some still having remnants of leathery skin still clinging to them despite their age. This pit turned out to be one of many plague pits dotted around the cemetery. The man began to panic and tried to clamber out the pit while the bones beneath him crunched and rolled beneath his feet. When the poor man finally freed himself, he ran out to the Black Mausoleum and barged past the groundskeeper walking his dog in a frantic and terrified state, scaring him and the hound also. It seemed that disturbing the remains and damaging the tomb of George MacKenzie angered the spirit, or maybe even the souls of those who prematurely lost their lives to the Black Death, as after that, the attacks and sightings around Greyfriars Kirkland increased tenfold. But there was one more instance that truly angered the ghost of MacKenzie. On the 30th of June 2003, two teens, a couple of rapscallions, forced open the doors to the Black Mausoleum. Just gazing at the coffins weren't enough, however, and they decided to open them up. The boys then proceeded to cut off the skull of one of the corpses with a penknife, with one of them putting their hand in it to use it like a hand puppet. It was even rumoured locally that the boys also drank wine from the skull, because nothing sets off a Chardonnay like a hint of stale bone dust. Yummy. The identity of the skull was never revealed, but many believed it was bloody MacKenzie himself. Now, that was bad enough, but one of them was accused of, how can I put it, jokingly simulating a dirty act. Basically, the skull wasn't the only head these guys got. Oh, I can't keep that in.
Brother,
The two were caught when a tour guide saw them carrying something in a blanket. He then called the police, but they ran away. Fortunately, one of them returned shortly after with a girl because she didn't believe their story, and the police arrested him and later his friend. In total, they caused around £10,000 worth of damage to the mausoleum. While they were acquitted of breaking into coffins and doing the simulated dirty act, they were found guilty of disturbing skeletal remains, a crime that nobody has been charged with for over 100 years. The incident with the homeless man and the desecration of the corpse forced the city council to seal the mausoleum and lock that section of the kirkyard so no one could enter unless it was with the official tour group for Greyfriars. With this area having over 350 alleged documented paranormal attacks, it's probably for the best. The real-life ghost stories surrounding the bloody MacKenzie poltergeist aren't just a relatively modern thing, however. Those living near Greyfriars have been passing down one story for several generations. A couple of centuries ago, a criminal fugitive, John Hayes, was on the run in Edinburgh and decided to hide out in the Black Mausoleum as the city had police presence all over. He spent 6 months within the tomb, only leaving to scavenge food. When the police finally caught him in the Black Mausoleum, they found the man in the corner, rocking backwards and forwards, rambling to himself. While he made very little sense in his apparent insane state, he said that the coffins would shake at night, while MacKenzie could be heard scraping around inside his coffin and banging on the lid. While the rare case with the boys stealing the skull and causing havoc in the tomb was obviously just a couple of disrespectful idiots trying to have a laugh, back in the Victorian times, the prospect of stealing corpses was a big problem. In the light of day, Greyfriars is a beautiful and peaceful place to spend time, with remnants of its sinister past barely noticeable. Of course, it has its fair share of creepy details, like any cemetery, such as dead-eyed stone angels, screaming gargoyles, and sunken gravestones. But the most chilling detail found here is arguably the metal cages covering some of the graves. And don't worry, they aren't designed to keep the dead from escaping. During the Victorian period, the medical studies programme in Edinburgh began to grow in popularity. Students would come from far and wide for their opportunity to cut into a fresh cadaver to study the anatomy of the human body. The problem was, there weren't enough fresh bodies for everyone to have a turn with a scalpel and bone saw, and the only legally sourced bodies could be executed criminals. This inadvertently encouraged a black market for stolen corpses acquired by body snatchers and sold to local students. Now son, got everything for school? Textbooks?
Yep.
Pens?
Yep.
Lunchbox?
Yep.
Freshly dug up cadaver? Of course. After not too long, this gruesome practice became an epidemic and groups of criminals, also known as resurrectionists, began entering Greyfriars to dig up fresh bodies. Families had to start coming up with ways to prevent their loved ones from being stolen. This included protecting the graves with iron cages, which were called mort safes. There are stories of grave robbers who discovered claw marks on the inside of the coffin, meaning that the poor people were accidentally buried alive and woke up 6 feet under. In fact, being buried alive was such a problem back then that some people were buried with a bell on the surface with a rope going down to the coffin. If they woke up, they could ring the bell and get help. Literally saved by the bell. That 90s show would have been very different if they used this as inspiration.
It's alright, 'cause I'm safe out the bill.
Two of the most infamous grave robbers of all time were William Burke and William Hare, who lived in Edinburgh between 1827 to 1828 and would frequent the surrounding graveyards, including the Greyfriars Kirkyard. After stealing and selling fresh bodies and seeing there was money to be made, Burke and Hare decided to cut out the middleman and began luring potential victims into their lodgings to kill them. They then sold the bodies to Dr. Knox, a prominent anatomy lecturer who gladly accepted them on a no questions asked basis. In total, Burke and Hare killed 16 people and sold their bodies, although it is believed to be as high as 30. Like the shoplifters selling cheese and washing up powder in the pub, the law eventually caught up with them, and in November 1828 they were arrested. Proving the saying there is no honour among thieves, Hare agreed to testify against his friend for immunity. Burke was found guilty and was hanged in 1829, an event that attracted over 25,000 people. In an ironic twist of fate, the judge ordered that Burke's body be sent to the University of Edinburgh for a public dissection which attracted hundreds of students. He became the product he sold. Burke's skeleton was then gifted to the University of Edinburgh's Anatomical Museum, where he still remains today. His death mask was also gifted to the Surgeons' Hall Museum along with a book bound in his skin, like a real-life Necronomicon. Now, I think it's important to note that Burke and Hare's grave robbing activities have been disputed over the years, with some believing that the two indeed start out as body snatchers, while others believe they only ever committed the murders. Regardless, evidence of Greyfriars' grisly history with body snatchers can still be seen today, with the iron cages still protecting the dead. While Bloody MacKenzie is the most famous spirit haunting Greyfriars, its most popular grave is that of the Greyfriars Bobby, a Skye Terrier. This little dog was the faithful companion of a man called John Gray, who worked for the Edinburgh City Police as a night watchman. Sadly, in 1858, John died of tuberculosis and was buried at Greyfriars Kirkyard. Bobby the dog led the funeral procession through the streets to his master's grave, but the heartbroken hound wasn't ready to say goodbye. Despite the caretakers trying to send the dog away, Bobby returned to his master's grave every day for 14 years, spending most of his time pining at the gravestone. Eventually, the caretakers gave up on trying to get rid of the mourning dog and decided to build him a shelter at the grave. They also fed him so he never had to leave his master's side. Bobby became somewhat of a celebrity in Edinburgh and was even gifted a new collar by the Lord Provost of Edinburgh. The dog guarded John's grave for 14 years before passing away of old age on January 14, 1872, finally being reunited with his best friend. He was buried in a grave close to John's. I'm not crying. You are. Since then, some have claimed to hear faint barking coming from the kirkyard, while others believe they saw a small fleeting shadow at the corner of their eye. Is this the spirit of the Greyfriar Bobby, still faithfully protecting his companion? While the story of Greyfriars Bobby is a heartwarming tale, it's not enough to overshadow the evil lurking within the cemetery. While the hundreds of documented claims of being attacked by the poltergeist are chilling, many believe that Bloody MacKenzie was unable to take a life, but that may have not have been the case. In the year 2000, a minister and spiritualist medium by the name of Colin Grant told the council and police that he believed the angry ghost of bloody MacKenzie had to be put to rest before he could hurt more people, or worse. After getting permission, Grant went to the kirkyard on a chilly November night along with a photographer called Susan Burrell and a local journalist who tagged along to document the exorcism. Colin began the exorcism ritual but admitted to the reporter that he was struggling to rid the cemetery of Mackenzie's ghost. Eventually, Colin admitted defeat and changed his target from bloody Mackenzie to some of the spirits of the Covenanters buried on the grounds who struggled to pass over. The ritual finished around 2 in the morning, taking a lot of energy out of Colin. His 2 companions later agreed that things felt weird during the ritual and that the atmosphere changed. As the weary medium began bringing the exorcism to a close, Susan decided to take one final photograph of Colin. When she later checked the image, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. In the photo, standing behind Colin's shoulder, is a dark shadowy figure. Susan later told her colleagues that whatever was captured on film was moving at the same time the photo was taken. What makes this even more bizarre is that the church was locked up for the night. Soon after the photograph was taken, the exhausted minister collapsed to the ground. The journalist immediately ran over to help him. Barely conscious, he began pointing into thin air and said, This is going to be the death of me." Words that prophesied his death. In January of the next year, less than 2 months after the exorcism, Colin Grant suddenly died of an unexplained heart attack, which came as a total shock to his friends and family. Some obviously attributed this to the wrath of George MacKenzie, who saw the minister and spiritual medium as some kind of traitor to the country for attempting to liberate the poor trapped souls of the Covenanters. Maybe bloody MacKenzie was worried he could succeed in moving the spirit on to the next plane of existence and feared his judgment day. So it's quite interesting that while there were sightings before 1998, they were quite limited. It could have been that the ghost was angered after the man fell through the floor and disturbed the remains below, or more rationally, the story evoked the imagination of the public and began to stir up paranoia and fear. If you think about how creepy graveyards can seem, it is possible that the eeriness caused some people's imaginations to run away with them. With that being said, imagination can't cause physical injuries, many of which left marks. The death of Colin could have been a coincidence. He was obviously fatigued in the churchyard, which may not have been caused by the paranormal, but an underlying illness. There have been different theories to try and explain the MacKenzie poltergeist: electromagnetic radiation from nearby machinery, geological effects, mass hysteria from all the terrifying accounts, and even pheromones. You smell that? Smells like spooky ghosts. Pheromones, which humans produce, are a type of hormone commonly found in ants and other insects. Ants use different pheromones to communicate, organise themselves, and more interestingly, trigger an alarm when there is danger, sending them into fight or flight mode, and a heightened sense of panic. The theory in this case is that humans can release a similar pheromone when they feel scared or anxious, which is then picked up by those around them. Some researchers believe that this could explain poltergeist activity, with the panic and fear being contagious, which creates hallucinations and auditory sensations. With poltergeist activity being attributed to adolescents when they are going through stress and angst when their hormones are going crazy, it's not just their underarms our noses are picking up, but the fear pheromone. Personally, I'm not fully on board with that theory. With the other poltergeist cases I've covered on my channel, not everything is just in the minds of the people involved. While some people could have hoaxed experiences and thrown things around, I don't think that's the case in every haunting. Even in this haunting, people went on record to say they passed out or were physically attacked, even violently. Sure, some people may have lied for attention, but even if we approach it super skeptically and said 99% of the 350 reports were liars, that would still mean at least 3 people were physically harmed by an unknown force at Greyfriars. And to me, that's 3 people too many. So, are the hundreds of accounts reported that the Greyfriars Kirkyard all completely made up? Or is the twisted soul of the 17th century lawman still lurking in the shadows of the Black Mausoleum? Let me know what you think in the comment section. I just wanted to thank everyone who supported my last true ghost story about Hal Fanog by subscribing, leaving comments and giving the video a like. It really helped the video find new viewers, so yeah, thanks. I'm still a little fish in a big pond, like Nemo facing down Bruce, but slowly and surely we're getting there. If you're new to the channel, join us. We're cool. Well, the subscribers are cool. And until next time, sleep well, friends.